This extension tube is just simply a hollow piece of metal. There's no optics in there. I could just take a pen and drop it right down through it. What it enables you to do is get closer to a subject, and it decreases your minimum focusing distance. I'll just take the camera off the tripod, and I'll get closer and closer, and uh-oh. See how those front glass balls are completely out of focus, and then they get better when they're at a distance? There's only so close that you can actually get before something starts to become out of focus. So every camera's got this problem at some distance at a certain focal length, and the longer the focal length, the further away that you've got to be. The reason a camera has a minimum focusing distance is because what's in focus over here is defined by the distance of the lens to the film plane. So here you can clearly see, and I actually showed you this in the first video, that when you move this front standard out and the lens becomes further from the film, things closer to the lens become in focus. When this front standard is back all the way, everything at like 30 foot and beyond, it changes depending on the focal length, but everything at a really far distance is all in focus. And then the further that I move this out, the closer I can actually get into a subject. Not that close. That's the problem. Even if I have this out all the way with this 180mm lens, I've got to be more than a meter away from this just to get it in focus for this lens. The equivalent, by the way, since that's a fixed focus lens, for say a zoom lens, that bellows is inside here. When you turn this, you see what it's doing? It's changing the distance of that front element from your film plane back here. So that's normally what your lenses are going to do, because most lenses aren't fixed focus. If I want to take an image of that light bulb over there, without any bellows extension, I have to be so far away that it ends up just being this tiny circle on the inside of my film plane. But I want to get that light bulb to fill the film. That's much bigger, but the light bulb is still far from filling the entire image plane. So the next step is to add on an extension tube. So now look at this. With an extension tube between the lens and a fully extended bellows, the light bulb is now much larger. That's almost filling the entire piece of film. The only trouble is that the depth of field is very shallow. Either the back of the glass is in focus or the front parts are in focus. Now this is f4.5, so it'll become better when you drop it down. But you know what? Maybe I just want to get one of those little rings in focus. How do I get even closer? Get some painter's tape, and onto your lens, tape on backwards another lens. And this is starting to get too heavy to hold. It probably weighs like 9 or 10 pounds. Look at how closely I can focus in to this curved element now, and here's
a still shot of it so you can see it more clearly, because pro tip, ground glass is not actually glass, it's actually plastic that will be completely ruined forever by any solvent.
Actually, I discovered after I'd recorded the videos that if you use some lens clarifying compound, which is sold in most headlight restoration kits, and you just apply it in a circular motion around the Fresnel part of the ground glass, it'll actually make it pretty darn clear. I mean, you can just about see through that again. So I guess if you accidentally use alcohol to clean one of these, as long as you get some special compound that magically makes the plastic clear again, you'll be fine. What about this? Why on earth do I have this really poor quality digital camera right here? Well, I shouldn't say poor quality, it's the same quality as the camera that's recording this. I don't know if it's the same sensor, but the images that it takes are about the same as the video that you're watching right now. In comparison to this, to my medium format camera, this doesn't take images that are anywhere near as good. So why are you taking this out on your little trek? Because it has fully manual settings up here. I can go into a fully manual mode. I can set the ISO, which I can't even do on my video camera. And what that enables you to do is see the scene with specific settings that you're going to be entering into your camera. That's important because your exposure meter is going to be wrong. If you're shooting a scene that's covered in snow, it's going to end up gray. If you're shooting a scene that's completely shadows, it's going to end up like way too bright and washed out. It's going to look completely wrong because it's lying to you.
a very snowy scene is supposed to be completely overexposed, and a very dark scene is supposed to be underexposed. And with this, you don't have to think about that. You don't have to interpret the light meter's results. You don't have to know the zone system. This is your degree showing that you graduated from the zone system. You just set it to whatever shutter length and aperture you want so that it looks good on the back of this. When the scene looks right, then you take its settings and you transfer them over to here. Usually, it's going to be completely different. This has a much faster shutter speed than this is capable of, and this has much wider apertures than this is capable of. So you figure out what you want your depth of field to be, you set that correctly, and then once you know what your depth of field is supposed to be to get everything in focus, or out of focus, then you basically just translate, okay, it was that's that many more stops than its aperture was, so compared to what its shutter says, I'm going to have to move the shutter by so many stops in order to get that to be right. If you can't match up this with that, either it's because you need a lot more light, because you can't make your aperture long enough, and you need to freeze the motion, and you can't get your shutter speed fast enough, you need more light, or I can't really think of any other way that its numbers wouldn't line up. The only problem that I've ever had doing this is that I couldn't get a fast enough shutter speed that I wanted, so I needed to use flash instead, or to add in more lights. So this replaces your light meter. There's no problem with getting something with a screen that has fully manual settings that allows you to set the ISO. The only sort of component that I haven't covered is this, because I already covered it in my first video. This is the Polaroid back. It's super simple to operate. You flip that open, you lift this up, you pull out your previous piece of Polaroid film. You should really watch my first video on how to do it, but occasionally you need to squeeze in on these in order to remove this roller. Because this roller will become gunked up with chemicals, and you have to take this out and clean it off. Otherwise, it'll have too much pressure and it will prevent the chemicals from actually getting spread and squeegeed across the entire piece of film, and it does not look pretty. So make sure to clean those rollers every pack or every other pack, not every 5 or 6 packs. But otherwise, this thing is wonderful. This thing allows you... Your digital camera should have mostly told you whether you're going to have it right or not, but this thing like guarantees for you on your film whether it's going to look good or not, because you won't know for another 2 weeks whether it looked good. This will tell you right away, as long as it's the same ISO as your film is. This will tell you right away whether it looks good. And if it ends up being bad, at least you'll have one good photo on this. There's most certainly a disadvantage to shooting with this, and I would like to do an entire video about the errors or the mistakes in shooting Polaroids. But the major disadvantages of this are it takes forever for photos to get developed if it's below freezing. You can't really use this for previewing if it's freezing outside, because if you're trying to do it during sunset, you're going to lose your sunset waiting for just one exposure of this to show up. So it's got drawbacks. So I would really use this just to have a record, or just to prove that your settings are correct. I mean, there's some settings on that digital camera, like I was saying, you've got to change the aperture and the shutter speed so much, maybe you're wrong. Or maybe, I think most importantly, why you should be shooting with this is because if you've got this stuck out all the way, and you've got your extension tube on there, and you've got filters on there, you don't have like a chart telling you, you've got a chart telling you how far the exposure compensation should be for this sticking out, but maybe what you thought the filters should be is wrong. Or maybe, you know, you don't have to worry too much about this. You take a sample photo with this, sample shot, and then this will tell you whether you've got your exposure compensation all set correctly. You don't have to take a photo on film and just hope it's right and do some bracketing and hope that got it. You can just use this and it will actually show you whether all of this camera's settings are correct for the film or not. So that's what's wonderful about this thing. I'll do a whole video about all the mistakes of what can go wrong while you're using this, because lots of things can go wrong, which are pretty funny when you're using this. So that concludes my accessories video. Have fun shooting.